Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. First and foremost, I want to wish everybody a happy new year, all the best for 2021. And in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the IBM ValuePoint, which is scattered around in parts on my workbench here. So the goal of today's video is to get everything assembled back into this little case here, get it up and running, install the sound card, CD-ROM drive, and play some games. So first thing we're going to do is take the motherboard and put it back in the case. So this is one of those all-in-one motherboards featuring the graphics and all of the ports all on the same board. So we're just going to pop this into the case. Obviously, we also need to attach a couple of screws here just to hold the motherboard firmly in place. Next up is the AT power supply. So the original one gave up on me all of a sudden, so I had to replace it with this new one. I'm going to remove this drive bay bracket here so that I can easily attach the power supply button again. So as this is an AT power supply, the power button is also part of the power supply. So yeah, we're going to be needing to put this in here so that the actual power button, which is on the case, can basically attach itself to this power button here. Now, one thing I noticed as I was putting on the case is that this power connector here, this little pin here, seems to have broken off. Normally, it should be a little bit longer, and I was having trouble pushing it down via the power button of the case, so I had to add a screw here so that I could make up for the lost height. Obviously, the motherboard needs power from the AT power supply, so we're going to take the two power connectors here, make sure that the black leads touch each other, so if you position them in the wrong way, bad things will happen. We also need to attach some LEDs here and the PC speaker to the motherboard. And then we can already do a first smoke test. Now, at first I thought the computer was dead because I didn't hear any noise. Now, I had been working on an IBM PC XT in a previous video, which makes a lot of noise. And I was a bit surprised that this one was so quiet because it was in fact working. So at the end, I got a display and I got the 5 volts coming out of the power supply, so everything was good. Next up is a riser card, so this will give us access to a couple of ISA slots and Visa local bus slots. We have the drive bay here with the 3.5-inch disk drive and the hard drive already attached, so I'm just going to be adding this one here. This will also hold the riser card in place, so we'll attach that. Next up, of course, is the IDE cables, so everything is integrated to the motherboard, which is pretty convenient. It is a bit of a tight fit, so we're going to do our best in terms of cable management. So it's a standard IDE cable for the hard drive. We're also going to attach power to it, power to the disk drive, and we're also going to attach the floppy drive cable to the floppy drive. Now, one thing I noticed is that the hard drive was giving me some issues. In fact, it wasn't always turning on. And I discovered that, by touching this Molex connector here on the power connector of the hard drive, that the hard drive would all of a sudden stop. So there was some bad connection somewhere. Now, in a previous video, I also had the exact same issue also on a Western Digital Caviar drive. So I was expecting to find a problem with the power connector on the actual hard drive. So I decided to remove the PCB from the hard drive here. So this is held in place with a couple of Torx screws. And there's this little connector here which attaches the PCB to the rest of the hard drive. So we're gently going to be lifting that up. There is one cable attached to the PCB, so very carefully we're going to lift that up and remove that cable from the PCB, so that we can have a clear view of the PCB and see what we have here. Now, at first glance, I didn't notice anything. On the previous Western Digital hard drive that I had, you could clearly see a crack on one of these 4 pins here, but all the connections seem to be fine here. So In the end, it turned out it was a bad connection inside the Molex connector itself. So the 12-volt cables which are routed through this Molex connector were giving, a bad contact. So that was basically the issue. And this is again, one of those things that you don't expect to go wrong when building your PC. And sometimes, you can start thinking about, is it going to be the hard drive? Is it the jumper settings on the hard drive? Is it the cable? So you hardly ever expect it to be something as trivial as the Molex connector, but it does add to the time it takes to investigate and debug all of these issues. But with the new Molex connector, the hard drive was running fine and we didn't have the issue anymore. So with the hard drive working again and everything installed, we can start up the PC and we get the IBM PS ValuePoint. We get the 4 megabyte memory count. I had already installed MS-DOS 6.22 in the previous video, so we're just going to be starting that. It's doing its memory test. We have a mouse driver installed. And if we look at the memory, we see that we have 4 megabytes of RAM. And more importantly for MS-DOS, we see that we have used 85 kilobytes of conventional memory, giving us a free amount of 554 kilobytes. This is going to be important later on as we're going to be starting playing some games. But first we're going to be adding some multimedia to our PC. And what you see here is actually a multimedia upgrade kit which was sold by Creative, which contains a CD-ROM drive, a Sound Blaster. It also included some multimedia CDs, which I don't have unfortunately. But at the heart we have this CT1600 or Sound Blaster Pro 2. Now this is a really excellent card from Creative. It has the proprietary Panasonic CD-ROM interface for our CD-ROM drive. It is dated 1992, so this was actually an upgrade from the original Sound Blaster Pro. Now the main, or perhaps only difference, was that this one contained a more advanced Yamaha OPL3 chipset, this YMF262 chip. It also features a PC speaker input, so you can redirect your PC speaker sound into the sound card. It has an audio CD input jack so that you can listen to audio CDs. It also has a lot of jumpers because this is obviously from the pre-plug and play era, so everything was configured using jumpers. For example, you can set the IRQ, in this case it's set to IRQ 5. You can also configure the DMA channels, so in this case it's set to DMA 1. You could also set up DMA sharing, enable or disable the joystick, and set the I/O address. Now the CD-ROM drive is also pretty interesting because it uses these CD-ROM cartridges here. So instead of a tray opening out of the CD-ROM drive, the idea was that you would place your CD-ROM drive into this caddy cartridge thingy here, which opens up like so. You put in a disk and then you slide in the cartridge into the CD-ROM drive. Although I do like the look and feel of those things, they aren't the most handy things to work with. There's a lot of mechanical stuff involved in order to get this mechanism to work, so I'm guessing it's also pretty error prone. So you can see that this CD-ROM drive is branded for Creative because it contains the MPC Multimedia PC logo and also the Sound Blaster logo. Now on the back we have a standard Molex connector. We have what appears to be a standard IDE connector, but this is not a standard IDE interface. It uses the same cable, so it's a 40-pin cable, but it's not compatible with IDE. So here we can see the model. So this is a CR523-B manufactured in February of 1993. Now because we're going to be attaching the sound card like this, upside down basically in this ISA slot, I'm already going to add the CD-ROM drive cable as well as the CD audio input cable. And then it can be slotted into its ISA slot. Now to hook up the CD-ROM player, we're going to be hooking up the CD audio cable, the bus cable and the power cable. And now we can proceed with the software installation. So I'm going to be using this 2-disc driver set from Creative. So this includes an installer which will guide you through the installation process of the Sound Blaster Pro 2. Now this is not really needed if you just want to play some games. Most games have Sound Blaster support built in, and you don't need any drivers from Creative in order to play those and make use of your Sound Blaster Pro. But this installation does allow you to test your sound card. It installs a couple of applications like a CD player, some sound files. You can test your Sound Blaster card also to make sure that all of your hardware settings are okay. So let's take a listen to the 2 operator FM music. Sounds pretty good to me. On to the next. Again, sounds fine. On to the digitized sound. Well, I guess we can say that the sound card works. So let's start the installation. It will create an SB Pro directory on our hard drive and install a couple of files in there. So again, you know, basically sample files, some Windows applications, some utilities to set the volume. It's a 2-disc installation, so we need to swap the discs in the middle of the installation. But overall, it's a fairly painless process. It will also modify our autoexec.bat. It will modify our Windows installation. And then after a reboot, we should see some Sound Blaster stuff popping up, and the sound card should be operational. Now, if we do the mem command again, we see that we are still using 85K of conventional memory. We still have the same amount of free conventional memory, and that's because there are no TSR or memory resident drivers here for the Sound Blaster card. So on the memory front, everything remains as is. Now, what the Sound Blaster drivers don't do is install drivers for the CD-ROM drive. Now, luckily, drivers are available for this Matsushita CD-ROM drive, and I just happen to have them here on this floppy disk, so I'm going to be inserting that. And before we're going to be launching the installer, I just wanted to look at the README file, which is included on this disk here, which will give us some additional information on not only the CD-ROM drive, but also on how the driver should be used. So here you can see that this is a proprietary, I don't know if the spelling is actually correct, CD-ROM drive. It's a double speed tray loading type CD-ROM drive. It also goes to talk about how we should install it. So we have an installer here. And it also talks about how the driver should be loaded. So we have a driver here, a sys file, which needs to be loaded in config.sys. And the driver has a couple of switches that we can use. So we have the device name, obviously, and we also have an optional board address option, which is, in our case, a Sound Blaster Pro. So there we can specify the I/O address of the Sound Blaster. Now, when I launched the installer, I figured this was going to be smooth sailing. So we specified the type of CD-ROM interface that we have, which is the Sound Blaster Pro. And although it did kind of pick up the CD-ROM drive, the installer just timed out and it said that it wasn't able to find the Panasonic drive, and it aborted the installation basically. So that was a bit of a bummer. So I actually had to go into config.sys and add the device myself. So I copied the CD-ROM device driver, which is this cdmke.sys. I specify the device name, which is MSCD001. Then we also need to go into autoexec.bat because there we need to load up the MSCDEX executable. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We specify the same device name and we should be good to go. But after a reboot, as it was loading the CD-ROM device driver, it wasn't able to find my CD-ROM drive. So going back into config.sys, I remembered that this driver had this SBP switch that we could add, which stands for Sound Blaster Pro. We give it the IO address of the Sound Blaster Pro, and then after a reboot, all of a sudden it is able to find the Matsushita CD-ROM drive. So that's good. So now, of course, we still need to test our CD-ROM drive. So I have inserted a CD-ROM in this CD-ROM cartridge. So let's insert it into the CD-ROM drive and see if we can read it. Now, of course, we still need to see if the CD-ROM drive works. So I'm going to the D drive here, and I can load up already the directory listing. Let me open up this README file here, which is on the disk. It's a memtest86 plus bootable CD-ROM, and it is able to read the file just fine. So yeah, CD-ROM drive appears to be working. Now to eject the disk, we need to use this clunky eject button, and our cartridge will slide right on out. So I'm really not 100% fond of this system. To me, it still looks pretty error prone, but yeah, it does look cool. Now let's take a look at the memory situation. Because we have loaded up the CD-ROM drivers now, I'm expecting that we will have a lot less conventional memory to our disposal. And as you can see, we already have 123 kilobytes of conventional memory being used. And that's because we have the CDMKE CD-ROM device, and we also have the MSCDEX executable, which is loaded up into memory. Now next up, networking. Because we already have premium brands, I went with this 3Com Etherlink 3 card, a 3C509B. It has the standard RJ45 Ethernet connector, and overall a very good networking card, well supported, good driver support, excellent utilities. So yeah, I think this works really well for this build. So as I said, the 3Com has very good driver support, so I have the floppy disk here containing the drivers and the utilities to configure the networking card. So let's go ahead and do that. So the setup utility has found our networking card. As you can see, it has found the address. We can execute the tests, so normally all of those should pass, so that's already good. We can check the hardware configuration, stuff like IRQs and IO addresses, just to make sure that they don't clash with our sound card. So I have this IO address set to 300 and the IRQ to 10, so this is good. As a networking stack, I'm going to be using MTCP when running under DOS. So this is a very lightweight set of utilities for TCP/IP. It needs this configuration file here. I'm using a static IP address. I'm not going to go into detail on how MTCP is supposed to be set up. The website has excellent documentation. I am going to show you how to load up the packet driver for the 3Com card. So this is included in the driver disk. So you just need to specify the interrupt number, and it will automatically detect the card. And then you can immediately make use of the MTCP set of utilities, for example, this ping here. Now, there are different ways to get files from and to your MS-DOS machine using MTCP. In this case, I'm going to be using the FTP server of MTCP and then using a modern Windows client with an FTP client to connect to the machine. And as soon as we establish a connection from our Windows machine, we immediately get feedback on the MS-DOS machine as well, and then we can start copying files. And back to the MS-DOS machine, you will get immediate feedback on the arrival of files and other FTP-related tasks. As far as transfer rates are concerned, for larger files, we're getting around 500 to 600 kilobytes per second, which is okay. It's definitely a lot faster than using floppy disks to copy files around, and also a lot more convenient, obviously. I have already installed Microsoft Windows for Workgroups 3.11, and I've installed the networking card using the driver disk and installed the Microsoft TCP/IP stack, as I have done already a bunch of times. Now, using Windows networking drives, it's very easy to copy files around, and that's a big plus for having Microsoft Windows installed. Also with networking support, for example, here I can connect up to my NAS. I can load up shares on my NAS and have them immediately available here using a network drive. So this is very, very convenient. So with a couple of games already installed on the machine, now we've reached the end of this part of the video. It was a really nice experience to put the machine back together again, install the multimedia packet, install the networking card so that we have some connectivity, and it provides us with an excellent starting point for the final part in this video series, where I will be looking at some additional games, upgrading the memory, optimizing the memory, and doing some benchmarking, comparing it with other systems. So, if you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, giving this video a thumbs up. Please leave a comment in the comment section below. I hope to see you guys soon. I wish you guys all the best for 2021, and see you soon. Bye-bye.